Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Partnership. I'm your host, Franz Schrepf, and I'm super excited to have with me today Juraj Pal, the former VP of Partnerships and Product at Slido, and also on deck. Great to have you, Juraj.
Hello, friend. Thanks for having me.
So I wanna drive straight in because we only have half an hour. Can you tell everybody what Slido is?
Yeah, Slido is a audience interaction platform. So companies like Spotify and Zendesk would use it for their all hands meetings or company town halls to do Q&As, live polls, quizzes, just to bring some engagement to their employee meetings.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because, like, if you're a viewer of the show for a while, I work at Hopin, which we built a virtual events platform during the pandemic. We don't own it anymore, but we built that virtual events platform during the pandemic. It got a lot of attention and customers during the pandemic when everybody moved online. And one of the first things when I moved into a product partnerships role, one of the first things people asked about was Slido. And it was so weird because, like, why would somebody, like, why would all these like hundreds of thousands of event organizers want to use Slido rather than ask about other things where you might have assumed that they might want a Salesforce integration or Mailchimp or something like that. And so one of our first integrations was with Slido, which is actually how we met as well at the time.
That's right. Yeah.
And one thing which really stood out to me, Uri, at the time was that your title was VP of Product and Partnerships. Like, what made you guys decide that you wanted to merge that into one role?
Well, the true answer is probably a lot of mess in a startups and a lot of like us figuring out what to do and how to position it. But I think truthfully, Slido was one of it's definitely a type of product that wouldn't be able to get where we got without the sort of strong partnerships and ecosystem play, which we can talk to more about. But it was very important that we play well with the rest of the ecosystem and with the workflows of our users, whether it's in the context of events, as you mentioned, like people end up hopping and they want to bring their favorite audience interaction tool being Slido, or whether it's like in meetings and presentations and so on. So we the two functions and partnerships, even from the beginning, had a very strong seat in the org. I reported to our CEO, and we didn't really have that more typical issue of how do you strengthen that internal voice for partnerships. And then it just naturally, as a company scale, as we're unlocking new pockets of growth, it became more of a product play. So it just made sense to for those to live very, very close together. So I think it was around COVID when that kicked up, when I sort of switched more onto the product side and worked with that team. And partnership was I'm not a typical product person, so I came with that partnerships lens into product as well. And Slido was a place where that really worked, and it wouldn't work for all of the companies for sure.
Yeah, it seems like it's like such a unique product in that sense that it almost has to be integrated in some sort of partner tool in order to be valuable. But did you ever feel confused about your role if you were looking at product and partnerships? And the reason I'm mentioning this is just because normally there's the build by partner decision. And it seems like you own two of those hats yourself, which means that you might actually be a little bit conflicted about should we build, should we buy, or should we, partner on this side, because you kind of own all these different areas. Or do you think that was an advantage for you?
I think, did I feel confused all the time? Yes. But it made sense from a point of view where with the product partnerships that we invested in, we were very picky. One, because we had to, because of you're a fairly small startup and you have to choose what you build. But we also treated these product integrations and these kind of surfaces as essentially separate products. Like when we build the Slido for Google Slides integration, which is a big one, we almost treated it as a separate product. Like that was kind of our first step towards somewhat of a multi-product strategy in the company. So how does that fit into the product org? But I would say I was definitely more involved on the side of product that had to do things with integrations and partnerships. And I would partner cross-functionally with other folks on the core product. But there was definitely a chapter following COVID where everyone sort of scrambled towards video conferencing and presentations, and the world looked differently, where we had to position most of our product org to focus on these partnerships.
Yeah. And those were like no small partnerships. Like maybe walk us through that as well. Like you had an integration with PowerPoint, which I tried, and it's kind of hilarious because I don't know how you did it, but you download software and then all of a sudden inside of PowerPoint there's a Slido button there. Like, that seems like it's like hacked together. I don't know if, how closely you work with the PowerPoint team to actually make that happen. But then also, like, with, integrations with all the major video conferencing platforms, like, it was not just Hopin, which was, like, the number 1 in virtual events, it was also, like, Microsoft Teams and Zoom and everybody who had a Slido integration. Like, how important were these before the pandemic versus then during the pandemic? Like, did you already have them on your radar, and how did you so quickly win partnerships with these large companies when the pandemic arrived?
Yeah, and that's a nice compliment on that PowerPoint, but then I'll come back to that. But so specifically with PowerPoint was actually one of our number one most requested feature, pretty much from the beginnings of Slido, so even before the pandemic. But these integrations weren't such a priority or such a pressing priority before COVID. Really, it happened in that shift where the weeks when everything kicked off and people started working from home and offices closed, we would have customers on calls asking us how to use Zoom and how, not even Slido, but how do I use Zoom and how do I figure out this
Just
presentation?
general Zoom.
We would
Just
love to help you there, but there's a limit. But I would say something that we saw then that I think it's becoming more obvious now in terms of like how people purchase software is it was really all about thinking through that purchasing decision about how does this piece of product or software that I'm going to buy, how does it operate with the other technology decision I've made in the past. Like I think I resonate with that today and like the ecosystem strategy that we're seeing more of, but we saw it around COVID where it was so crucial how Slido plays in those workflows. So when people got on a call with us, how do I use Zoom? It was about how do I set up Zoom and then put Slido in there because what I think the lockdowns did for employees and the cultures is they realized they need to invest more into employee engagement. And one way to do it is a happy hour and send you like a pizza voucher to order pizza at home. And the other is
great
to
for engagement.
and the other is to actually create this channel where employees can ask questions and share their concerns and opinions during those meetings and outside as well. So it definitely accelerated things, and we were on the luckier side where we got to drive some of that like Zoom growth wave.
Yeah. It's so it's so interesting because Slido, like, it's from the outside, looks like a straightforward product, which, shouldn't be hard for a competitor to recreate. But one of the things I learned when I looked at the Slido integration at the Hopin side was that you also partnered with, like, the largest events in the world, like South by Southwest and, like, all these kind of like, platforms. They all, used Slido or recommended it for their speakers in order to create engaging shows. So what do you think did you learn from, like, targeting these large events that you used for your larger partnerships? Or was there some overlap in this grassroots approach?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Slido is a stupidly simple product, and that was its strength, but also sometimes the risk where some companies did indeed like they built copies of Slido internally because it was fairly easy, or you could replace it with an email that someone in your company sends before online meetings asking questions, or a Google Doc. But these events that you mentioned, that was actually the first version of our partner program. Like that's when we started talking about partnerships. When we look at those events like Mobile World Congress or South by Southwest, and they could either self-serve on the website and buy a Slider for $200, or we could partner with them and in a way that raises our brand's credibility because at that point we're a very small unknown startup and really sort of makes us more legit in the industry as the audience interaction solution. So those are super key, more from like the marketing go-to-market perspective. And there was what Slido had uniquely in the product was this viral loop where if you are in an event like South by Southwest and you are 10,000 people in the audience, they all open Slido to ask questions. When then they fly home and go back to their work and sitting in a meeting, many of those people thought, oh, I can use this for my team or I can do this for my presentation. And that's how it sort of spread in that internal meeting use case. And that sort of was our chapter 2 for Slido.
Yeah, because I was already familiar with the solution before I worked in events myself, because I didn't have an events background. I just, attended events, and it was already familiar with it because people used it before, right?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because at Hopin we experienced exactly that same viral coefficient where, if 100 people attended an event, you were guaranteed that at least like 5, 6 of them or so would also then go on to attend and like host another event with also 100 people, which kind of
Yeah.
then just like made the product spread virally over like the course of a year, to hundreds of thousands of organizers that way. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Lincoln, who joined us in the chat. Great to see you here again, and appreciate you tuning in from the UK. If you have any questions, if you're watching this right now and have any questions for Uri, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and then we'll also highlight you, and we are keen to discuss those questions as well. But I wanted to dig in a little bit more. Like, you were one of the first or early employees at Slido. Like, it's such a like partner driven tool where it relies heavily on these integrations. Like, when did you start seeking out partnerships with other platforms, and how did you decide that you should choose one platform over the other?
Yeah, I think when we started taking especially these technology partnerships and integrations seriously was when we entered this chapter 2 of Slido, where we were focused on the all hands meeting, and even more so down the line on like the individual presenter in a meeting. Like, you presenting to your team, it could be 5, 10 people, like really small scale, but you still want to like do 2 polls to gauge their understanding or engage them throughout. And that's a very different use case from like the large scale event where they have 5 people in the backstage operating Slido. Now suddenly it's you and 1 laptop, and how do you do that? So when we broke that down and sort of worked backwards from that goal, it happened to be 2 pillars for partnerships for us. One was, they're fairly obvious, but one was presentation software. So you mentioned PowerPoint, Google Slides, and then video conferencing was 2. And that was the key workflow where you're going into a meeting and you need to use Slido alongside of your presentation. How can we make that as seamless as possible, where you click next slide and Slido is there? It should be like, that's the level of simplicity we wanted. And then 2, especially after COVID, that presentation is happening over Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Webex or Meet. And how can we like make that sometimes like tricky screen sharing and switching to Slido and presentation and yourself? How can we make that also seamless? So those 2 pillars sort of open that conversation of like, okay, we need to go after these, and if we are to succeed in this chapter 2, we need to have really seamless and slick product integrations with these big products.
Got it. And okay, let's dive straight in, because I'm so curious. Like, how did you get the attention from these guys? I mean, maybe piggybacking on the question of like, when should you invest? Like, what stage were you at when you said like, okay, we're gonna go out and like now we're gonna partner with Microsoft? And then how did you get Microsoft to care?
Yeah.
Like, you're probably the first product I've seen which actually integrates with PowerPoint. Maybe I'm naive, but it definitely it took me by surprise when you actually had that button inside of PowerPoint.
Well, it took about 6 years, so it's it wasn't
It's no
easy.
small feat. Like, you probably, as a startup, you need to have enough runway to actually survive that long.
Yeah, like, that's the thing. These work because they were so key to Slido's product. And again, like, we would not be able to grow and continue growing without having these. Like, they're such a like important bets that we had to make, even though, I wouldn't advise all the startups in similar space or other spaces to like bet so hard on Microsoft or some of these big techs, because like logos is one thing. Like, comes to the discussion of like, why would you partner with these big giants, and like doing it just for the sake of logo or some sort of credibility, I don't think is good enough reason. Sometimes you need the logo to like make say you're launching a new partner program, and you need that big hitter to make it more credible, sure. But for us, it was very much driven from the product strategy, and asking the question, how are we going to make our users successful, especially in this new direction where we want them to use Slido with their presentation and their Zoom. And that sort of brought us to these, and we said, well, we have to find a way. So there's no, as much as I like to like find some playbook moment in there, each one of them was different, and each one of them was really about building the relationship at the beginning. And they all were for sure the sort of big small fish, big fish type of relationship where we are a small startup. Why should they care? Why should Google, Microsoft, Zoom care?
Well,
But
why did they care?
well, I think the timing helped because with everything that was happening in the market, they also were hearing the same feedback from their customers who wanted to make their Zooms more interactive, more engaging. They wanted to um, get the voices of their employees or the people in the meeting heard more. So they're starting to hear that feedback more than they were before. It wasn't completely new, and some of them already invested into some like very like version 1 features for Q&A. Like many of those tools, whether it was Zoom or Teams, they had some Q&A, some polling, but very, very bare minimum, which would do only like a little bit. And now that when you have this base of companies who are used to this level of tooling like Slido, or even other tools like Kahoot or Mentimeter, who also provide you like analytics and analysis into your Q&A, and what does that mean to your culture, and what are the themes that the employees care about. Like you want to bring that with you to the Zoom or the Microsoft Teams. So they were listening to that, and then one thing was really about aligning that, and they wanted to invest into it, and they saw the need to invest into it. And for them, it's about, do we keep building these features ourselves, being Google or Microsoft, and are we going to get them to the level of depth and quality as Slidos or Kahoots that have been added for 5 to 10 years, or are we going to partner with them and provide that interface? So that definitely played in the cards and helped us get that conversation started.
Yeah. Yeah, I always like to think about the build by partner decision as like core activity versus urgency. Like how important is this to me? And then how
Yeah.
urgent is it? And it feels like you kind of hit that exact sweet spot during the pandemic where Q&A was probably, or polling were probably not like top priorities for like Zoom or Microsoft or others, or even Hopin, frankly. Like we had our own polls, but it wasn't nearly as good. But at the same time, it was really urgent all of a sudden. Like all of a sudden it was like incredibly urgent, so nobody had time to actually build this themselves. And so that kind of sweet spot was, the perfect niche for you guys to like for you guys to swoop in. um but you mentioned it was 6 years for that PowerPoint integration, for example. Like what did that 6 years look like? Like, it's
So it
such a
wasn't.
long time. Like you were
Yeah.
probably not like sitting there calling Microsoft for 6 years. Like what happened in
No,
that time
no,
roughly?
I joke about it. It wasn't 6 years of actively working on it, but it was
Okay.
6 years of hearing about it from our users. Like
Okay.
that's what I say, that from pretty much the beginning, like we keep hearing about PowerPoint,
Yeah,
and we
gave me a
know
mini heart attack there, but yeah.
that. But it was like probably good 2 years. I don't know the exact estimate, but it took time. And there are many sort of twists and turns in the relationship where we, when I say there's no playbook for me in this, that look specifically with Microsoft, that looks like going to events where Microsoft is present, where we are present, where's that overlap, and where we're speaking to the same customers. Like I remember flying to, this is in an education space, conference called BET in London, and that was sort of the beginning of our relationship with Microsoft there. They were launching some features. We were there announcing Slido for Google Slides, which would be like a very same product but for a competitor. And that's where I would like hunt them down, people from their team, and find a relevant person to like meet them at the event, and start building that relationship without really like at that point wanting anything from them, but more of so that we're known, and so that we can start building that relationship for later on. And I like to lead with this mentality of just like give, and then take, and trying to apply that here, in like, even if it's a beast like Microsoft or Google, like can we still be helpful as the small startup and show initiative, and is it gonna be sort of return in terms of relationship? So building that relationship is very like messy and unstructured, but I think very necessary to then have some sort of voice in a potential partnership like that. Um, and then it sort of moves slowly towards like, well, here's the product that we're thinking about, and here's what it looks like in Google, and we would like to bring the same to Microsoft, and getting their feedback on the product and where they see the fit. And then it was all about also the technical limitations and possibilities. For a long time, the APIs did not allow us to build anything that we would be proud of as a company in terms of product quality. So that's why we actually for a long time pushed that integration, because we knew that we could have built something, maybe 80% of that, and some of our competitors already have. So we were sort of losing on that front, but we really wanted to. We were so selective with these, and we were also so careful about not putting something out there that would not be the same level of like a core product, core feature of Slido. Unless we really like were proud of it, we would not invest into building it. And then
Yeah.
work with them on the APIs and on some documentations, and then slowly we're able to build on top of it. And with PowerPoint, like going down the rabbit hole, but one thing is to build PowerPoint for Windows, the other one is PowerPoint for Mac, and like that took another year. I think the team is just launching it now, and I'm not joking. So it's
Yeah.
a journey, but again, there may be some of these very like long-term strategic bets for depending what your company is, where it actually makes sense to treat it as a bet and give it time, or they may not be, depending on the company. So don't
Yeah.
use it as
It is very defensible. Like, I feel like once you have that integration with PowerPoint or whatever, even though it took so long and it's such a pain and such a big risk, like at that point, it's way harder for somebody new to like launch a similar product because
yeah.
they would have to like match your integration. So I think the defensibility itself pays there. I really liked your insight around going to events, like figuring out where the other teams are and going to events because if you say like, hey, we want to partner with Microsoft, it's such a big blob of people. It's like 100, 200,000 people, or maybe even more. I haven't looked up how many people they have, but not everybody there will care about you. That's just a truth. But specific people within the company might really care about you. And so I
Yeah.
guess for you, you just had to find that person who is like on the PowerPoint team who is responsible for engagement, interactivity, or whatever, who might be struggling with exactly that one problem you can solve, rather than
That's
approaching it as like, well, we're just gonna write like Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, and just ask him like, can you partner with our tool?
That's right, and it's both. It goes both ways. I remember getting off some of these calls early on with the CEO of Slido and myself, and we're joking like, "Yeah, I would go for a beer with this guy. Like, I really like him, or like them," and like that was our feel like, oh, we finally found someone who we could actually build something with. I also meet a lot of people who, and there's nothing wrong about it, but they just don't feel connected to caring enough about it. But that like scrappy event or whatever
Yeah.
the playbook is there, it worked the same for Google. I remember the first meeting we had with Google was, and the way we got there was during Sabas EDU, which was one of our customers from the like events days. And when we set off to build this integration with Google for slides and partner with Google, we got a speaking gig at Southwest EDU, where for the first time I presented this vision of Slido and Google together. They had no idea that we're presenting this and that this product is about to be built by us. But I used that to then sort of cold email some people and cold message some people on the Google team who were also present at the event to say, hey, we're presenting this thing. Let's meet while we're at the event. And that's where we had our first meetings and build a relationship. And it went from there. So again, to my
Yeah.
point, you probably can't copy paste these well enough, but there's a common thread in there, something where you show that you care and you go the extra mile. That does pay off.
Yeah. I like how you willed it into existence. You're like, we're gonna announce it, and then
Yeah.
we're gonna actually make it happen. And we're gonna use this announcement to put pressure on them that it has to. Like, were you able to actually build it without them? Like, if this would have like, like if they would have like not responded to your emails, etc., like would you have still been able to like integrate like Slido into Google Slides, or would have been not actually feasible? Because that seems like a bold move.
Yeah, Google Slides, probably yes, to a large extent. Their APIs were documented much better than
Yeah.
Microsoft's at that point, so probably yes. But I think we would be missing a lot of in terms of co-marketing and going to market together,
Yeah.
and even like account mapping together very much down the line on a very limited basis. So like those things would be a big miss. One thing that we were able to do because we started building this relationship with Google is, yes, we build the integration. We also teamed up with some of their team to build it together. So it wasn't just us, which was nice. But then also we got Google to actually host our launch at their Google, their HQ in Chelsea Market in New York. And I remember them telling me like, we never do this for partners. Like we don't host partners to do their product launches in our HQ. I'm like, cool, but like you're doing it now. So it seems to be a fun morning where we invited our customers, they invited theirs. And it was very like small communal thing in this massive Google ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think it was great.
Okay, like that's a fascinating story. Before we dive in, I just wanted to say hi to Antonio who's watching. And he loves the polls example to gauge understanding and engagement, and I agree. What's really interesting about Slido, actually, what I learned when we looked at the integration was that you also get information about the people who are responding to these polls, which is what you're lacking in a lot of cases. So it's
Yeah.
actually great for like intent data when you're like trying to sell or when you're trying to figure out like what do they actually care about. And that's really where like a lot of the meat and the potatoes are, less the like, oh, we just help you answer Q&As and stuff. Which brings me to the topic of sales, and you just kind of like alluded to it with like account mapping, etc. Like, how did you get the attention of the sellers of these large partners? Like, as you said, like an integration is probably not a partnership. Like you could have had the integration with Google Slides, but that would have been no co-marketing, nothing around it. You would have had to do all the legwork, right? How did you get the attention of like the people on the marketing team, the sellers, the people who host events in the Google HQ, to like
Yeah.
actually engage with you?
Well, I think most important, the one thing that I believe around integrations and tech partnerships is that unless you really invest into like adoption of that integration, I don't think you can drive meaningful revenue or any like cool marketing out of it. So that was the priority for us, and that was also partly it took us some learning to realize that we can't skip that part unless we're really showing like healthy adoption of that integration. Because one thing is, and it's same with platforms, like you can like get developers interested. And I saw this and Webex when I was working there after the acquisition. It's one way to like get interest from developers to build on your platform. But if their integrations or what they build doesn't get adopted, like the flywheel and their interest sort of just dies. So that was a big one. And once we had that, it was also a bit of a mind shift with some of these partners where there's a shift from selling core product that they're used to versus selling a platform offering or a bundle or more of an ecosystem play solution, which would be like Webex and Slido or something packaged more like that. And that took a while, and there's a lot of enablement that we invested in there. And in that enablement, outside of like all the obvious things that you would do, a big one for us was giving them the story and selling them on the story why Slido exists and what a Slido help you achieve. And I know it's still work in progress today. So like even now the Slido is part of Cisco, like getting the massive Cisco sales org engaged and to care is still a challenge, and still something that they're working on. So it's probably a never ending battle, but I think these few things were important learnings.
Got it. And how did you approach it? Did you like, I assume you didn't tackle every single one of these large partners at the same time. Like you probably would go like, okay, now we're gonna start co-selling with Google for a while and try to get that motion up. And then we're gonna start focusing on another partner. Or did you like what was your playbook to it?
They're pretty, yeah, they're spaced out because also in terms of like how we're building product, we could not be building the Google Site integration PowerPoint at the same time. Like they really happen like more of a one at a time type of thing. And then as we like would launch them, and we would do also very long beta programs with each, like keep them in private beta for as long as possible, and then do GA at some point when we got the right signals. And then like I remember Google, it was at first very isolated account mapping-ish situation where we would like look at our higher education customers and opportunities and theirs and look at the overlap there. So like start with like very like MVP pockets of what can we look into safely. And also we as why we didn't use any tools like Crossbeam or Reveal that you have today. And I love all the access that we have to those data layers today. We didn't have that. We would often have these awkward calls once a month or once a quarter when we're like looking at the spreadsheet, but you're like, who shares first? And it's awkward. And yeah, you know that.
Well, it's great that you got them at least to that stage. And it's also like it's great because it helps you like work together with the other organization more and also like learn on like more about them and like shared understanding, which could lead to an acquisition, which in your case it did. And I know we're hitting up on time, but I did want to touch on that real quick. Like, how did these kind of alliances influence Slido's acquisition at the end?
Yeah,
Specifically, the acquisition with Cisco Webex. That's the one we're talking about, in case you don't know about it.
yeah, it wasn't an end goal for these. As I mentioned, like the goal was to create a product that our customers will care about and makes their life easier and their time more successful with the product. But it was, for context, we were a bootstrap startup out of Europe. So after COVID, we were actually naturally coming to a bit of a crossroad of like, do we raise capital now, or do we actually find a strategic partner? And naturally, the traction that we're seeing with investing into some of these platforms, including like Zoom and Microsoft and others, we're opening some of these conversations because the timing, they're also very much investing into this type of functionality. And again, it's that like buy build decision. And so at that time, Jitu Patel, who was previously at Box in leading product, he was also a customer and a great advocate. He at that time moved to Webex, and the conversation got started about sort of a shared mission and a big picture vision for where we could take both their video conferencing and how Webex is sort of rebranding into this new era, and Slido's audience engagement features. And it just seemed like a great match that we can make these experiences 10x better with both of our platforms together. But it was also a big, make it sound like it was so easy and made sense, but it was also challenging to like, how do we fit into such a massive org? So like
Yeah.
Cisco.
Yeah, definitely. But it's great to hear that you had an in. Like, it's great to hear that you actually had like a customer who then moved over, and then that kind of started that whole conversation.
Yeah.
On top of, like, I guess the general partnership you already had with Webex at the time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we are up on time, and I know you're a busy man, so I don't want to take up too much. So this was fascinating. This was eye-opening. If you have one piece of advice you would share with the audience, if when they're trying to like start a strategic partnership with a larger partner, what advice would you give them?
I would say go really deep on the use case and understand how you can make your user more successful, and invest into adoption as you're building it.
Yeah. Don't succumb to shiny partner syndrome. Like, just because it's a big logo like Microsoft doesn't mean that they're actually the right partner for you. Like,
That's
you
right.
have to have that use case in mind. Love it. Awesome. You're right. Really appreciate you taking the time. And Lincoln, Antonio, everybody else who's watching today, I really appreciate you tuning in. You could have been anywhere and you choose to spend this time with us. So that really means the world to me. And with that, we'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode of The Partnership. See you then.
Every time